The opening sting of his music, a deafening blast of horns and hip-hop, it always set his heart on fire. Standing back in gorilla position, waiting to hit the ramp and hear the roar of the crowd, there was no feeling on earth like it. Jack Blinds burst out from behind the small curtain, out onto the stage like he'd been shot out of a cannon. The screams of the crowd met his ears. It made his pulse quicken, sweat running down his palms. Those cheers, the eternal soundtrack of this great sport, made him feel as though he could do anything. The fans, whether they loved him or they hated him, Jack had plenty of both over his career. They were the soul of wrestling. Jack set his teeth, waving at the crowd, trying to match their energy, and started down the ramp to the ring. He'd wrestled so many matches it was impossible for him to even ballpark the number. Over the course of his 20-year career, the ring had been his home. He had changed a lot over those years, but the ring never had. Laying his eyes on those 20 feet by 20 feet of rope-enclosed canvas and pine always put a smile on his face. Rings like that hadn't changed since the sport began, at least not in Vatican Championship Wrestling. VCW was the oldest and largest company in the business. Only they could draw a capacity crowd for the biggest show of the year, Unibrawl 31. Even people who didn't know the first thing about wrestling had heard of Unibrawl. In his career, Jack had the privilege of headlining the legendary pay-per-view event 6 times, counting tonight. As he strode down the ramp to the ring, a sign caught his eye. It was a pretty good likeness of Jack's face, blonde hair and long jaw. The sign's owner pulled a tab in the back, and the Jack on the sign threw his arms up in a victory pose. Impressive stuff. The dedication the fans showed always helped remind him why he did this. Jack stopped halfway through his entrance to shake the sign holder's hand. The man had his son with him. From the wonder in the kid's eyes, Jack could tell it was this little guy's first show. Jack removed his wristband, handed it to the kid with a toothy smile, and gave him a fist bump. The crowd cheered as he entered the ring at a sprint, sliding under the bottom rope. The canvas was already worn from the last 12 matches, but Jack kissed it as always. He sprang to his feet, evoking another burst of applause from the crowd. The fans were packed to the rafters in the sold-out stadium, and all their eyes were on him. Standing under the lights, under the weight of thousands of eyes, Jack felt invincible. Jack retreated to his corner as his music died down. The lights dimmed throughout the arena. He didn't know much about his opponent. Though he'd seen the guy in the locker room dozens of times, they'd never really spoken. He was one of the newer talents from the independent circuit who'd arrived at VCW a little over a year ago and had torn through everything and everyone in his way. A low piece of classical music began to play throughout the darkened arena. It fluttered up and down the piano keys until suddenly transforming into a deafening guitar riff. As it changed, so did the lights. Bright red filled every corner in the stadium as if it had been smeared with blood. Fire erupted on stage as his opponent emerged from gorilla position. Despite Victor's smaller stature, his entrances were a sight to behold. He wore a black cloak with spiked pauldrons over his gear. The crowd recoiled in an excited fear as though they were at a horror film as Victor strode through the fire. He didn't slide under the bottom rope like Jack. He took the stairs, one at a time, as if he was relishing every moment the crowd spent under his spell. When he stepped between the ropes, the lights returned to normal, and George Bennett, the ring announcer, hurried into the spotlight with the microphone in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," said George, an overweight man in his 60s with a low, booming voice, "this is your main event of the evening." The crowd's cheers erupted into a deafening roar. "The following contest is scheduled for one fall," George continued. "One fall," the crowd screamed back. Jack smiled. That was his favorite part about this sport. The fans were a part of the show, controlling the pace and flow of the matches. Their cheers spurred on the competitors. Their boos infuriated the wrestlers into making mistakes. They had more power than they even realized. "This one's for the Kingmaker's glove," George declared. More cheers. Tonight was the first time a match for the Kingmaker's glove would be headlining Unibrawl.